Of the 4 types of hiatal hernias known today, 95% of incidence resides with the type I or sliding hiatal hernia, which typically can be managed medically with gastric acid suppression. The remaining 3 types are lumped as paraesophageal hernias. These include the true PEH, type 2, combined sliding and paraesophageal, type 3, and extragastric, type 4. With the advent of modern antireflux surgery, failed fundoplication overlaps with this classification. Furthermore, disruption of the esophageal hiatus for other disease processes, such as esophagectomy, potentiates the PEH, especially type 4. This chapter, in concert with other procedures such as fundoplication and esophageal lengthening, Collis gastroplasty, will deal with the surgical management of PEH types 2 to 4, which anatomically may also encompass redo fundoplication. Principles of repair include definition of anatomy and symptoms, safe reduction of abdominal organs back to the peritoneal cavity, excision of the hernia sac, closure of crura, with or without mesh repair, evaluation of intraabdominal esophageal length, and an anti-reflux procedure. Necessity for PEH repair lies with the patient's symptomatology, medical status, and chance of obstruction or strangulation. PERS can encompass symptoms of gastroesophageal reflux disease, GERD, which includes typical symptoms of heartburn, acid reflux, and dyspepsia. In contrast, atypical GERD symptoms manifest as laryngeal and pulmonary complaints of non-cardiac chest pain, dyspnea, poor dentition, sinusitis, asthma, chronic cough, pneumonia, and halitosis. PEH-specific complications include gastric volvulus, incarceration, gastric outlet obstruction, and higher mortality when performed emergently. Early studies on mortality in the 1960s demonstrated mortality rates over 50% for PERS with associated gastric volvulus, although more recent analysis suggests that number to be overestimated and is actually more likely to be under 20% for such patients in duress from PEH. For all PEH patients, overall mortality is under 1% and can safely be performed with a laparoscopic approach even in the face of obstruction, gangrene, and so forth. Indications for PEH repair therefore should be tailored to patients who are symptomatic and medically likely to survive an operation. Ultimately, most patients who have a PEH will become symptomatic. Preoperative diagnostic studies help dictate the range of elective, urgent, and emergent nature of asymptomatic patient with a PEH. In those patients who are in extremis, the minimum workup needed for urgent or emergent PEH repair is radiographic evidence of incarceration, perforation, obstruction, or failed antireflux surgery. However, the majority of patients present in an elective manner, and we therefore advocate for a complete workup to assist preoperative planning of the symptomatic patient with PEH by the addition of manometry, pH testing, and endoscopy to rule out pseudo-obstruction or esophageal motility disorders. Chest X-ray, at presentation, whether to an emergency department or a primary care physician's office. The chest X-ray gives quick and cost-effective information to the severity of the PEH. Mediastinal gas bubble can be seen on plain film radiography as well as the presence of pneumoperitoneum or pneumomediastinum esophagram. The supine and upright plain film esophagram demonstrates static anatomy and can often locate the gastroesophageal junction, GEJ, in relation to the diaphragm as well as deduce the presence of reflux on delayed films. Mucosal abnormalities can be seen with this modality as well. Computed tomography, CT indications for obtaining CT scans include the emergent presentation, inconclusive but worrisome findings on two-dimensional radiography, and PEH type 4. CT aids their preoperative planning by alerting the surgeon to the extent of skin preparation and positioning for operative repair but is not necessary. Upper endoscopy. All preoperative patients should undergo upper endoscopy if possible. By visualization of the esophageal and gastric lumen, neoplasm, Barrett's esophagus, and esophagitis can be biopsied, and, in case esophagectomy is warranted, provide histologic diagnosis. Furthermore, anatomic landmarks can be seen, such as the distance between the hiatus and the GEJ, as well as the size of the hiatal hernia manometry. Several studies of benign esophageal disorders confirm the use of preoperative manometry. Distal esophageal pressures greater than 30 mm of mercury indicate favorable outcome of response to fundoplication, which, according to some surgeons, is a threshold for performing a complete versus partial wrap for the antireflux component of the PEH repair. Manometry also rules out primary esophageal dysmotility, including achalasia, diffuse esophageal spasm, nutcracker esophagus, hypertensive lower esophageal sphincter, LES, and ineffective esophageal motility. We do not advocate performing a complete fundoplication for patients with SOP.
When I opened my online Slavic languages bulletin one day in nearly September 2004 and firstly learnt about a book in Thringing Cedars series that was singa translatorin to English, little did I realize the kind of literary adventure that was awaiting me. Viewed as I became acquainted with the details of Vladimir Miga's fascinating work, I read through the first 3 books in the series before beginning the actual translation. It gradually dawned on me that much of my previous translation experience, especially in poetry, from Pushkin to Anna Akhmatova to modern bards, and poetic prose, as with the stories of contemporary Russian writer Mikhail Sadovsky, not to mention my own religious background, emphasizing man's unique status as imagery and likeness of creator, had been preparing me specifically for this particular task. Miga's work was simply the next logical step, it seemed, in the progression of my career. Indeed, I found myself taking to it not only with the enthusiasm that comes with the prospect of facing a new professional challenge, but even more with the thought of feeling very much at home in his new literary environment. Some of my friends Sankalags have asked, what kind of book are you translating? No doubt wondering whether they could look forward to reading a novel, a documentary account, an inspirational exegesis on the meaning of life, or even a volume of poetry. But even after completing the translation of Anastasia, I still do not have a definitive answer to give them. In fact, I am still asking myself the same question. My initial response was a rather crude summary of a gut impress scion. I would tell them, think of Star Trek meets your Bible. My feelings about the book, however, go far beyond this primitive attempt at jocularity of the 4 disparate genres mentioned above. I would have to say Anastasia has elements of all 4, and then some. First, the book reads like a novel. That is to say, it tells a first-person story in a most entertaining way, bringing out the multi-facet character of both the author and the title personage, in a manner not unlike who a treatise of novels might expect. It tells a tale of adventure in the raw Siberian wilds, where even sex and violence make an occasional appearance, though with a connection to the plotline quite unlike their counterparts in any work of fiction I have read. Secondly, the book gives the impression of a documentary account of real-life events. Even if one's powers of belief are sometimes stretched to the limit, I am glad that my linguistic experience has given me access not only to the book itself, but also to a host of Russian-language texts on the internet that have enabled me to corroborate from independent sources a great many of the specifics the author saw fit to include in his narrative, names of individuals, institutions, scientific phenomena, etc., all of which turned out to be genuine, thereby contributing an additional measure of credence to what otherwise might seem utterly fantastic. Much of the core, corroborative information Soglind, I have attempted to pass on to the English-speaking reader in the footnotes, with the help of additional commentary by the publisher. And yet there is a significant area of the author's description where authenticity must still be judged by the individual reader, which tome is one of the hallmarks of a work of literature, in contrast to a merely academic or journalistic report. Thirdly, the book poems Riona's thinking and feelings with the tle force of a divinely inspired treatise. A treatise on not only the meaning of human life, but much more. Anastasia offers a tremendous new insight into the whole interrelationship of God, man, nature and the universe. I would even go so far as to call it a revelation in science and religion.